First of all, I just wanted to welcome Luke O'Neill, who writes Welcome to Hell World, which is a newsletter I enjoy reading a lot, where he writes kind of almost like stream of consciousness style, but talking about very pressing issues that are in the news in kind of a raw, real way. So Luke, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit and we'll get started.
Sure, yeah. Well, hi, it's Luke O'Neill, as you said, and I'm a writer, live in Massachusetts, and yeah, I just put out my second book based on the newsletter. This one is called Lockdown in Hell World, and it's about my experience over the past year and trying to sort of in real time get down what it was like to live through this pandemic, not only for myself but also by interviewing lots of people that have been affected by it. I was just joking that a minute ago that writing isn't a real job, and so in order to be like conscious of that, I included as many voices as I could of working people, over the course of the year while I was reporting the book and writing it, whether that was like service industry workers or people, who work in water parks or like, healthcare workers and stuff like that. And so the idea was try to get a broad range of experiences and to sort of get it down as it was happening. There's going to be thousands or hundreds or however many of books written about COVID. And but I feel like a lot of them are going to be more sort of looking back, and the idea here was to sort of tell it in the present as it was happening, and it seems like I did a fine job of that. To be honest, I don't think it's as good as my last book, but that's okay. The first one was based on the newsletter Welcome to Hell World as well, but for that one I had like the entirety of my life to write it, and this one was sort of like written in six or 9 months. Basically, I'm saying my book sucks and don't buy it. It's a piece of shit.
What an endorsement. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to kind of skip to a question I was going to ask later, but what you just said reminded me of it, which is, one of the first pieces of yours that I read was kind of your installment of the Last Normal Day series. And it inspired me to write my own version, because I thought mine was a little bit unique. And also thank you for sharing that on your newsletter. That was really cool of you. But I really love the idea of that series. And I'd be curious to know, because you got a bunch of your friends who are writers to write their version of it. And there was like a whole bunch of different takes on it and kind of different experiences around COVID. Like, how did the idea for that come about? Maybe you could talk about that.
The Last Normal Day was a series I did on the newsletter, and I had about a dozen different writers. Some people you guys have probably heard of, like Aisha Taylor did one, and Josh Gondelman, who's a great comedian, did one, and some of my writer friends that I really like Jeb Lund, who's one of my favorite writers and a friend, and Joe Cohane. And I think I had the idea for the Last Normal Day almost immediately as this whole thing was starting, because, I think a lot of us were thinking that as we were going into our various versions of lockdown or quarantine or whatever, we each did. And the effect of that was like kind of exacerbated for me, because as I read about in the book, we just were moving into a house in the suburbs on April 1st, like, barely 1 year ago, right as, COVID was sort of starting. And so I spent like, March figuring, when you're about to move away from a place, you're like, okay, I'm going to go, to my favorite bar one more time. I'm going to go get takeout from the place I've always gotten it from. I'm going to go to my barber, whatever. And I never got the chance to do all that stuff, because all of a sudden it was, time to just stay in your house. And so I was really thinking a lot about the last time I was going to have been able to do all those things. And it just kind of, so then I wrote a piece for the newsletter asking people, like, when was the moment that you knew like something was weird? And I got all these great responses, about people being in the supermarket and realizing that, they had to act differently now, or picking up their kid from school, and we could also sense that there was this big shift happening, and things were about to change. And so for the last Normal Day series, I wanted to get, more in-depth look from a bunch of people who I respect and think are great writers, and really worked into this really broad range of voices and experiences. And one writer, a friend of mine, Aaron Burnett, he wrote this great one about wearing, right at the beginning, like being a Black man wearing a mask out in public, and like all of the different types of feelings around that, and especially in the airport, and how people looked at him differently. And some people wrote about like the feeling of the streets being empty. There was a lot of this is like, I mean, people do this a lot when there's something tragic happens, but a lot of comparing it to like a disaster film. And
yeah, totally.
So I included mine in the book. I was actually hoping to make all of those essays into a book on their own, but for some reason we didn't have any luck selling that one. So the publishing industry is rotten and useless. I heard Mike Pence got a couple books recently though, so good for him. Can't wait to see what he has to say.
Yeah, I'll be first in line for that one too.
Oh yeah, I can't wait. Big Mike Pence guy.
Well, I think what was interesting about it for me was, well, even COVID in general, I think it's just that it was this shared experience. Like literally everyone basically on the planet was experiencing it around the same time. And so there are so many different stories around that. And it was like those different moments, that it wasn't like it all happened on one day, like a 9/11 or something.
Right.
It could have, for me, I think it was like March 11th. And for someone else, it might've been April 15th, who knows? And they were like finally like, oh crap, this is actually real,
Some people, it never really even changed their lives anyway.
True.
No, but I think that's what was interesting, because we were all dealing with a singular problem, but not in our experiences weren't all the same, like for someone like me who already worked from home, it wasn't that much of a disruption to my life. For people who are had to work in a grocery store, or the coffee shop or whatever, or in a factory where people were getting really sick at the beginning, excuse me, it was a huge deal. So I tried over the course of the year in the newsletter and in the book as much as I could to make sure I wasn't having this myopic focus on my own life as like a someone who does the computer for work.
Yeah, totally. No, and it's like, I think you tap into that I don't know if it's like guilt or whatever, but where I felt it too, where it's like, I actually have a job where I can work from home, and I'm very lucky in that sense, but a lot of other people weren't. Like I have friends that, because like I used to be a touring musician, I have friends that do that for a living still, or friends that were like roadies, and like they're just SOL now.
Screwed. Yeah, that's like music is a big part of my life and something that I do. And I, DJ, I used to play a lot in bands, but not anymore. But like all of my friends in that industry are just absolutely like fucked the whole year, And my friends who work at clubs now are starting to book shows, or looking ahead to like September, and it's like, it seems like it's really close, but it's also like still so far away, like really, that's like one thing that I certainly miss, because going out to shows is a huge part of my life. Not a little bit less so now that I'm getting older. I can't be going out to a show 5 nights a week, but yeah,
that's relatable.
I cannot wait for that to come back.
Yeah, cool. Well, maybe we could kind of take us back to how you started writing. I think I read somewhere that you were like in an MFA program, maybe, or maybe you dropped out or something.
Yeah, I was.
Did you ever go to J school or anything like that?
No, I never studied journalism, and I'm sure somebody who doesn't like me could take that quote and be like, yeah, obviously. But no, I studied literature in college, and I went to do an MFA program at Emerson in Boston, and I did like 2 years of it, and wrote my thesis, and it was time to turn it in, and then I got a job at an alt weekly in Boston. I was like, well, fuck it, I'm a professional writer now. I don't need my degree. That may or may not have been a good decision. Certainly, I still have the loans for paying off that degree that I didn't finish. So that wasn't very smart. But it worked out. I mean, I guess it ended up being a good choice. So I, worked at it all weekly for a few years, and then I started freelancing for places around Boston, like the Boston Globe and the Boston Phoenix, and sort of decided, as I was joking earlier on, I haven't had an office job in a long time, and I fucking hated that. Even like working at a all weekly or like a magazine, I just never liked being in an office. So I decided I'm just going to be a freelancer and wait tables and stuff on the side for years until I didn't have to do that anymore, and just sort of slowly climbed my way up the freelancing ladder, and it was kind of a long journey. I was still like waiting tables until I was like 37 years old or something, even though by that point I had written for all of the major newspapers and tons of big magazines and stuff. And wasn't really until like the past maybe 4 or 5 years that I was able to turn freelancing into a full-time job, because it's, as anyone who cares to watch this surely knows, the industry has been decimated in so many ways, and the pay is shit, and it's really hard to sort of make a living. And that's why it's like insane that my newsletter it's like the first time I've ever felt like I had any money in my life, but it took me a long time to get to there, and
Yeah. Go ahead.
it's not like I'm not saying doing some like you have to work hard type of thing, pay your dues. It's just like, no, everything sucks, and maybe if you're lucky, you might, and you stick around long enough, you might be able to make it work,
Yeah, like it's like a war of attrition in a way.
Right. It's like the last guy at the party,
Well, I was curious because it seems like you talked about, like, you wrote for these major publications, and you have these bylines that a lot of people would kind of kill for in some ways. So you're kind of a journalist in maybe a more traditional sense for quite a long time. So I guess in a way you liked it there for a while, right? But I'm curious what changed for you. Like, why go independent?
Well, I really like, there are two things that sort of radicalized me in my life in terms of labor politics. And one was, like I said, working in restaurants and seeing how labor there is constantly abused, and that's a big discussion going on right now with the all these stories about how nobody can find anyone to work. And it's like, well, yeah, you're offering $2.50 an hour plus tips, like, of course people aren't going to want to work for that. And then the other was just being in the freelance business, freelance journalism. It's like, it's not quite as bad as the way restaurant workers are taking advantage of, but it's basically the same idea. You're paid a pittance unless you're like a really big name. And so, after years and years of like, what you have to do is you have to cobble together, like, maybe if you're lucky, you'll get a piece that pays $1,000. Maybe if you're really lucky, you'll make 2,000 once. But like most of the time, it's like $200 here, $200 there. And like it's exhausting to just try to keep stacking those things together. You have to write so many stories, and you don't really, there's no, like, you're sort of like, you're treated like you're disposable by these publications, especially the larger ones. They don't need you, and it's like they're doing you a favor by giving you work. And so after doing that whole thing for like 20 years, and plus the process of like pitching stories and like emailing editors and waiting to hear back, and a lot of times you don't even hear back. Like, I always joke, like, hearing no is like the best thing that a freelancer can hear, because at least you're like, okay, I'm free to go try selling it somewhere else instead of waiting. So it just sucks, man. The whole thing fucking sucks. And so the past few years before I started the newsletter, I was doing a lot of work for Esquire and the Boston Globe. And then I had a couple of situations where I realized that neither of those places, despite having written hundreds of articles for each, gave a shit about me, and they would cut me loose at a moment's notice for no reason. And I realized that I would, I don't want to do that anymore. I mean, and that's when Substack sort of started. It's probably like almost 3 years ago now that I started my Substack, and I figured, well, fuck it, I'm going to give this a shot. And thankfully it worked out.
So did Substack reach out to you, or was that something you just saw pop up?
No, yeah, a friend of mine, Judd Legum, who does a really great Substack, he passed my name along to the guys that were starting Substack, and one of them came and talked to me and pitched me on it, and I didn't really want to do it, but they sort of talked me into it, and I'm glad they did, because newsletters have been around forever, but 3 years ago when I was starting, it certainly didn't seem like a viable career path, and now you see all these people making shitloads of money, so it's really shifted a lot in the past few years.
Yeah, totally. I wonder also, when you were doing the freelance work, did you ever have, because I know you have a very unique writing style, right? Like, it's sort of, like I said earlier, like stream of consciousness in a way, and somewhat memoir at times too. But I wonder, like, did you have issues like with button heads with editors and things like that when it came to your pieces, or did you write them in kind of a different style?
I always sort of wrote like this for my own, for like creative stuff, but like obviously they don't really let you do like 1,000-word sentences with no commas in the Boston Globe, as much as they should think about that. No, the whole premise of Hello World, my newsletter, when I started, so based on all that stuff I said about being fed up with the freelance journalism game, I purposefully said when I started, is like, okay, I'm going to do every single thing that you were taught not to do in traditional writing, because fuck you, so that meant like trying to make like inscrutable headlines, like trying to do the opposite of clickbait, like just like weird detached phrases that are kind of connected to the piece, but you wouldn't know it unless you read it. Like I said, run-on sentences, no commas, really difficult subject matter, like just writing about miserable shit all the time, inserting myself into the story constantly, which you're not supposed to do as a journalist, and a couple other things that escaping my mind at the moment. So I just decided to like do like the George Costanza, like I'm going to do the exact opposite of what your instinct is, and weirdly, I'm sorry to keep saying this, but like weirdly, I can't believe it succeeded, because it shouldn't have. It's fucking kind of a weird newsletter, and it can be kind of hard to read and hard to get into, but for some reason there's enough sickos out there that want to,
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I've read a lot of them at this point, and it definitely feels like a reaction in a sense to like your experience before. But I'd be curious, like when you refer to yourself, do you consider yourself like a journalist, or just say a writer, blogger, or you're like a memoirist, or what? Do you even care to?
It doesn't really matter to me. Like it has mattered to me in the past, whether or not I'm a journalist, and it maybe will matter again, maybe 5 minutes from now, but like right now, I don't really care. Like, I certainly don't want to think of myself as a journalist in the traditional sense, but you follow all those standard rules of not expressing your bias and trying to get comment from both parties in any given story. I kind of always say this when I'm interviewed, but like the main thing that I don't want to do is I don't want to hear both sides. And I think I wrote that in one of the first issues of the newsletter. It's like, I promise you I will never hear both sides. And, I think I've stuck to that for the most part. And by that, I mean, when when somebody is killed by the police, I don't want to go to the police and be like, why did you kill this guy? Like, I know why the police killed this guy. It's because they're the fucking police. Or when, you know, someone is, you know, taken advantage of at work by management, or you know, fucking chemical company poisons the river. Like, why would I waste my time being like, why, oh, why did this factory poison the river? Like, we know why, because of greed and fucking capitalism. And so I'm much more concerned with hearing from the people that are getting fucked over. And that's not really proper journalism, you know. You're supposed to let the bad guys have their say, but I don't really care about the bad guys, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of love that. I think that's probably part of what resonates with readers, right? It reminds me of years ago seeing a segment on, God, was it like the Daily Show or something, where they were like talking about climate change, right? And they're like, if you get someone from both sides, it makes it look like there's equal weight, but you really should have like 100 scientists and like one guy who disagrees. Exactly. That's really what the reality is, right?
Exactly, and we see that all the time in the. I'm sorry, I hate this expression, with the mainstream media throughout the whole Trump era, where we had to all pretend that this wasn't like all the shit he was doing wasn't like absolutely insane, you know. Not that he was, you know, uniquely bad as a Republican. They're all bad, and most of the Democrats are too. But the fact that, you know, or things like climate change, or like COVID and like vaccine denialism, you know, like we're seeing all these stories now, like you remember how they did all those stories about going into Trump country and asking people why they voted for Trump. Now we're seeing all these stories about, oh, why don't you want to take the vaccine? And like, I don't know, you know, why would we be sharing that point of view, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, so you're writing, from reading it, like a lot of times it's charged with like emotions, or like I would say often anger. Does writing about these topics kind of like help you process what's upsetting you? Is that kind of part of why you do it? Is it sort of therapeutic for you, or
a little bit? Sometimes it makes, I mean, I do include, I mean, you know, I include when I'm like writing on or reporting on the people, you know, who are being taken advantage of or hurt, or whatever, by whether it's, you know, healthcare, or the police, or you know, their employers. I often include in those stories like my own experience with those things, and then my own emotions, and some of my own like mental health stuff. And it can be cathartic to write that, especially since, you know, people seem to really relate to that stuff. And it's it can feel good, but it can also make me feel, it's also kind of backfires a lot, because lots of people, a lot of my readers like write into me with their own stuff, and I love that, and I encourage them to do it. But then it's like, I don't know, it feels like a responsibility, like what to do with that, you know. Like, I'm not, obviously not a therapist, and I don't even know how to fix my own shit. So, you know, I'm certainly not going to be able to give other people advice. So it can be kind of a heavy thing to deal with, but like, I don't know, I think it's probably a good sign that people trust me and feel able to share their problems with me. So, but the point of that, to answer your question, is sometimes it end up making me feel worse, you know. It's just like a constant stream of, you know, misery and suffering, you know. But I don't know, it's a reason why it's called Hell World, you know. It's not, which isn't to say I'm always fucking miserable and dour all the time, just maybe like 75% of the time, you know. I like to laugh and have fun too.
Yeah, totally. Well, I can relate to the you know, getting the responses and stuff. That happens to me too sometimes. Granted, much different topics, but I think there is like an emotional weight to that, right? That you have to bear a little bit, right? And if you're, I mean, you're probably getting a lot more of it than I am, you know. But kind of along those lines, you know, dealing with criticism and stuff, because you're talking about like pretty charged political topics, like pretty much all day, whether it's on Twitter or your newsletter. Yeah, how do you deal with just like any like negative criticism or, you know, just Twitter trolls or whatever, you know?
I don't know. There's like two separate things, like Twitter, people on Twitter who don't like you and like actual negative comments about my work, you know, like um, for some reason I'm lucky to get mostly good press and reviews on my books and writing. I certainly get shitloads of people on Twitter who think I fucking suck and want me to go kill myself. Um, I don't know. You have to have a pretty thick skin. I think anyone who spends any time on social media, or especially in digital journalism, will tell you that it doesn't mean like I don't like it if somebody tells me to go fuck myself. Like, but after like hearing that, you know, 1,000 times or whatever, it kind of loses some of the edge to it, and it doesn't ever completely go away. Every now and again, I'll be like, oh god, that one kind of hurt, you know. But I think it's with my writing, it's different because I'm proud of it and I put a lot of work into it, and you know, I think that I can stand behind it, you know, unless I completely fucked up somehow, which I've certainly done a handful of times in my life, you know.
That's funny you mentioned that, because the next thing I was thinking is, have there been times where with like reader feedback or whatever, where you've put something out there and then you get some feedback and you totally change your mind on something and go like, wow, I was actually totally wrong about that point?
No, I've never been wrong, so
No, yeah.
no, that's what. Um, yeah, I guess so. I can't think of an example, but I mean, like, I'm certainly not. I'm really not that smart of a person, to be honest. Like, I'm kind of a dipshit, and I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm a good writer, but no, I mean, I'm kind of kidding, but not really. Like, I certainly don't think I have the answers to everything or most things, you know. And so I'm like, I'm happy to. I don't know. I'm happy to. If I'm wrong, it's this thing online. You're never supposed to admit you're wrong, but like if I'm wrong, I would like to know. You know, I'd rather not be walking around with spreading false information or saying dumb shit. You know. So I
Yeah,
mean, there's
totally.
a difference between constructive criticism and just like, you know, trolling somebody.
Yeah, I guess where that was coming from is sort of like, especially with partisan political type stuff,
Oh
if
yeah.
you
Well, I
often
don't
see
really.
like the people digging their heels in more than going like, you know what, actually, I got to rethink this, you know?
I don't necessarily hear from like right wing or Republican people
Mm.
too much. I think maybe I'm more trying. What I try to do is more like pull liberals to the left a little bit more. You know, that's more like what I see as my central sort of project, if you were going to call it something like that. I don't think there's any convincing, you know, MAGA people or really entrenched right wing people that human beings are deserving of dignity and empathy. They've already sort of, you know, given up on that one. But if I can, you know, peel off a few, you know, MSNBC liberal types and try to get them to see more of a things from a more like left wing perspective, that's something I'd be happy to do. And I don't know, but yeah, the right wing people have certainly come for me many times. I've
I'm
definitely
sure.
got hot water on a few occasions for some stuff I've written, and it's not fun. But you know, it's only really scary when like people are trying to dox you or showing you pictures of the machine gun they're going to shoot you with and stuff like that. Otherwise, that type of thing tends to be no fun. But just being said, being told that you're an idiot is fine.
Well, some of that sounds kind of intense, but I definitely have not had to deal with that, thankfully. But
Well, you should
cool.
write some articles about guns, and they'll find you. You know.
I'm sure. um, so I kind of stepping back a little bit when it comes to your writing process, because this is a writing group. So I think, well, actually, before I go there, if anyone has a question, throw something in the chat, or raise your hand or something, and we'll answer it, or I'll answer it as we go. But since this is a writing community, maybe we could talk a little about writing. You know, I'd be curious to know like how you like generate the ideas that you work on. You know, kind of what's your just writing process if you have one?
Well, I mean, luckily for me, I picked a really rich thematic area to write from, you know, about like the disastrous effects of capitalism and, you know, militarized policing and for-profit healthcare, which would probably be like the three major things I talk about. And, you know, there was a period there when I realized Trump was lost. I was like, oh no, is everything going to be good now? It's like, no, it certainly is not. So, so I mean, it's kind of a joke, but like, I don't know. I guess if it's a different question if you're trying to come up with individual stories or like a type of broader area of things to write about. Sadly, for better or worse, I spend like 20 hours a day on Twitter, and that really is where I get a lot of my ideas. Like somebody will say like, oh my God, look at this medical bill I got. And then it's, you know, $50,000 for one Advil. And so naturally that's like, okay, I gotta get in touch with this person and talk about that. That's a story right there. Or someone will say, oh, I just got fired for, you know, talking about organizing at my McDonald's, and, you know, so it's really just about listening to people talking about the things that are happening to them. And that applies to any type of writing, whether it's journalism or, you know, creative writing or fiction or anything like that. And you have to really pay attention to, like, people think of writers as like self-interested, and a lot of us are, but you have to like pay attention to other human beings and what's going on with them. And if anything you write is going to seem realistic or mean anything to anybody else, you know? I don't know, that might be kind of like a cheesy answer. I'm not saying just go on Twitter all the time, but I will say one thing is that this past year of like rarely leaving the house has made it a lot harder. And that's another thing that I've always done, is just like going somewhere, like even if you don't have an idea of what you're going to be writing about, just like, you know, being somewhere different, you know. I think a lot of writers might just like, even without a pandemic, might just sit in their house like trying to like thinking like, oh, I'm gonna write now. I think it's really important to be out in the world, and in the same way that like being on Twitter, you'll see someone talking about what's going on in their lives. Like, you know, I always find myself like being really inspired by the stupidest things, like walking through like the Boston Common and looking at a statue of some old asshole and be like, oh, who is this guy? And then, you know, sort of working backward from there is just one example that popped to mind. And also like the sensory nature of being in the world. Like I, you know, like we said earlier, I went to do an MFA, was trying to write poetry and stuff. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like this is like a cheesy professor thing to say, but like you really have to use all of your senses, you know, in order to, I don't know, like engage with the world and then turn that engagement into something that anyone's going to want to pay attention to. But I don't know, I'm not an authority on anything, so I don't take my advice, you know. I just kind of figuring this out all as I go along, just like anybody else, you know.
Yeah, totally. I think what the last point that you made was particularly interesting to me, because it's I think what makes some of your writing like evocative, or you know, because you tap into like, it's not just like a traditional like a journalistic piece that I'm reading where I'm going like, oh, this person said this and this is what it means, and you know, it's like you get into like how you're feeling, and even describing a setting, you know, or something like that in a more descriptive way that sounds like more like creative nonfiction than just like a journalistic piece.
Yeah, I find that much more fulfilling creatively. Like, you know, like I said, I've written hundreds of dry, you know, newspaper type stories over the years, and it's just like you know, I think that I thought that by doing that, I don't know, I think when people are trying to start out as writers, they think anything that they do that's writing, it makes them a writer. And like people just want to desperately be able to say like, okay, I'm a writer finally. And so you do all these sorts of things that are technically writing, but aren't the writing that you wanted to do, you know. And that's obviously fine. People, you have to take jobs you know, you have to make a living, and that's why I did it, you know. The only thing, like when I was starting out, like 20 years ago or so, like the only thing that seemed like a more ridiculous job to take than a journalist was a poet, you know, like it was never been a robust industry. But I think people can lose sight of that over time, like what they really wanted to be writing for. And I certainly did. You know, it took me like 15 years to remember that I actually wanted to write something that was writing and not just putting words together, you know, if that makes sense.
So were you drawn to writing like at a pretty early age? Like what led to you going into the MFA program and stuff like that?
Yeah, the only thing I ever wanted to do when I was a kid was to be a writer. You know, I was kind of a big reader, and you know, I wasn't necessarily like, I loved music journalism when I was a kid. I like devoured Rolling Stone and Spin magazine and stuff like that. And that's what I wanted to do. And eventually that, you know, that's sort of most what I did for the first part of my career was I was a music journalist. And, you know, but meantime, you know, I've read all the things that you read when you're a young person, you know, like Kurt Vonnegut and shit like that. And, you know, that's what I really wanted to do, but it's quite as easy to become Kurt Vonnegut as it is to write a record review, you know. Maybe someday I'll figure that one out. But yeah, I also never really wanted to do anything else. You know, I never particularly cared about making a lot of money or being rich. Was never ambitious in that way. I didn't really have any other skills. I mean, I was okay musician, but again, that's another thing where it's almost impossible to make a living. And I didn't want to work in some shitty cubicle office job, you know. So it was kind of do this or nothing, you know.
Yeah. Do you think there's a certain amount of ambition in what you do though, right? Like, cause you're selling books and you're trying to grow an audience and things like that. So I feel like there has to be like some measure of that, right? Like,
yeah, I think there's a difference between wanting to have an audience and wanting to like be rich, you know, like the books. I don't really make much money on the books at all, to be honest. You know, you get like $1 a book, you know, and maybe it'd sell a few thousand copies, you know, like that's, and that's, you know, partly because I went with such a pretty small leftist indie publisher, you know, but like, even if you're going with like a big publisher and you got a person like me, what would I get? $30,000-$40,000 advance for a book, you know, unless you're like a super big name. And that's not, you know, that's not much of a living either when it's taking you a year and a half to write a book or whatever it is. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't mind making a lot of money, but you know, I've got, like I said, the newsletter is pretty successful right now, and it's like the first time I've ever had money in my life, and I can tell you that that's a lot better than having no money, you know. But I don't want to. I'm not trying to, you know, sell, you know, merch and turn Hell World into a brand and, you know, become some sort of lifestyle guru or something. I just want to, you know, have a comfortable place to lay down and drink my polar seltzer water, this ruby red grapefruit.
Lovely.
Yeah, this is.
I would not expect you to be
Massachusetts.
drinking that.
This is the Massachusetts shit right here.
Nice.
So try it.
You're supposed to be like drinking like hard alcohol or something. That's not very on brand for you.
Not yet. Give me a couple hours. That's why I have.
Although I have to say, you mentioned merch. Your logo would look pretty sweet on a t-shirt. Just saying that.
I know. But, well, the thing is, the other part about no ambition is I'm also like really lazy, which is why like Substack is so good, because I would never in a million years want to figure out how to charge, you know, thousands of people, you know, credit card information and have a spreadsheet with who signed up when. And you know, I do kind of take some issue with Substack lately. I think they've made some bad choices, but for the most part, the genius thing they did is realize that most writers don't really know how to do anything except for write, and they kind of like made all of the business aspects of it sort of seamless, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I wonder, are you thinking about at some point you might go on your own, or because I mean there's other tools where you could do similar things, but
There is, but I am really like a tech idiot, you know? I don't know how to do anything. And I don't know, a lot of people left Substack recently because of some of their, you know, questionable people that they've been courting to come over, and I totally understand why they might do that. I've thought about it, but like my thing is like, how do I know that anywhere else I go that isn't a bunch of assholes that are going to start using that platform next? And I'm just going to like keep jumping around from each place to place. And ultimately, I don't think there's any you know, completely virtuous place that you can work for. So I don't know, but I may amend my decision on that. We'll see.
yeah, I thought of it similarly because I have mine on Substack too, right? And it's like it's just a website really, like that sends an email, but like
Right.
at the same time it's like I'm not like aligning with their mission or what their decisions are necessarily. I'm just trying to write and put it out to
Right. I
people.
mean, we're using Zoom right now. I'm sure
Yeah.
the people who own Zoom, I don't even know who it is. I'm sure there's some fucking tech goblins, you know.
Cool. So David is asking a question here. Let's see. He'd be curious to learn how you'd say your voice as a writer has evolved. How is your writing now different from the personal writing you were doing earlier in your career? Did your style emerge organically, or are there ways you actively honed your style?
I think you change as a person, obviously, over time, and you know, like we're always. I think, I mean, except I don't know. Even if you're some great famous writer, you're still haunted by your influences and your, you know, not that I am a particular fan of his or whoever. I've even read his books in many years, but I'm sure like Jonathan Franzen, like he probably still has somebody that he's trying to be still, you know what I mean?
Mm.
And I think like the people that I've wanted to be have changed, you know, changes over time. Um, I mean, I mentioned Kurt Vonnegut a while ago. Like I wanted to be Kurt Vonnegut when I was a teenager, and then I stopped wanting to be him for 10, 15 years because I thought it was corny. And now that I'm older again, I'm like, oh wait, no, I really do want to be Kurt Vonnegut the whole time, you know? So I think like you're constantly like you're not a writer unless you're a reader, you know, and the things that you're reading all the time are affecting what you want to do. And you know, I've said this in a lot of interviews, but that book Cherry that came out a couple years ago was a huge influence on me for what I do in Hell World. And like I hadn't read anything like that. Like, you know, all the people listening here are writers. Like, you know, when you read something, you're like, it instantly makes you want to go write, but also at the same time makes you think that that you suck and you'll never be able to write anything again. So I don't know, so those moments have changed me over the years. And I don't know, my voice, I don't know. I don't know if it was a conscious thing or if I just more of an environmental ambient, you know, receiving information from my environment and you know, as my brain changed and I've gotten older, just sort of processing that and exporting it in a different way, you know. Also, like, I can't recommend turning 40 enough to sort of change your mind frame. Finally realizing that you are actually going to die is very good for your writing, you know. Like everyone else, I never thought I was going to die until, you know, past couple of years. I'm like, oh shit, I guess I finally am. Hopefully not for a while, but you know.
I totally endorse that point of view. I feel the same thing. So kind of going back to the doing a paid newsletter. I've talked to other newsletter writers or been on other talks like this as a viewer, and some of them can talk about, you know, audience growth and how when you have a paid newsletter or option that can stunt growth sometimes, or it makes it difficult to choose, okay, what's free and what's not, and things like that. How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's something I struggle with all the time. Like, I think a good thing to do if you're trying to build a free audience is to make your best stuff free, because those are the ones that people are going to share. And and the people who are paying you, they're going to be they're your fans already, so they're going to give you a little bit more leeway if something doesn't have to be a fucking home run every time.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I really sort of switched to mostly paid lately, because I've got a pretty big audience, like 20,000 free subscribers, but like not quite 2,000 paying. And and I want most of these other deadbeats to pay up, basically. Just half kidding. But I hate it when, like, I don't know, when I do a really good one. I guess what I'm trying to say is, when you make your best work as widely available as possible, and that'll attract the most eyeballs, and people will sign up for free. And once you've got them on your free list, you can, every time you set out a free one, you can advertise yourself. You like, okay, here's an excerpt of the one that I sent out to the paid list the other day. You probably missed this one, and then really try to, like, showcase the best couple paragraphs from that one, so they'll be like, oh shit, I kind of want to read that one. And but this is just stuff that I kind of make up on the fly. Like I said, I don't know anything about marketing, and I actually tried to be anti-marketing, but I do want a bigger audience, because what writer doesn't? So it's really like a lot of trial and error, figuring out what works. And weirdly, like, unlike in digital journalism, like, where Twitter like drives almost no traffic comparatively to like traditional newspapers and magazines, and it's largely Facebook and Google. Twitter is like the main driver for Substack. So it's like figuring out what does well on Twitter, and just sort of trying to tease out the best parts of your stories, so people will be will want to share them to their friends, or share them on their feed or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen asked, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'd be curious, maybe you could go back to kind of when you first started your Substack. But how did you build your audience?
I mean, I've had it's not huge or anything, but I have a fairly good sized following on Twitter, and it's certainly gotten even bigger in the past couple of years since I started the newsletter. And like, that's not something, I don't know, I mean, you can't, it sucks, but you really do have to have a big social media presence in order to build a big audience for a newsletter. Or just be really fucking good, and somehow everyone finds out about it. You don't need a huge Twitter following, but it certainly doesn't hurt. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I was doing this for a long time, so I had a bit of a following from the places I wrote for over the years, whether it was Esquire or the Globe or whatever. But if you don't have a big or medium-sized following like I do, I think a great thing to do would be like to align yourself with other like-minded writers, and kind of work together on sharing each other's stuff. And I have a group called Discontents, and we do like a weekly newsletter, and it's about a dozen of us, people roughly myself, or some much more better known, and we put out a weekly digest of all of our newsletters, and sort of work together to promote each other. And I think a lot of people think of writing as like a solitary thing, but you can find a lot of community and camaraderie with your friends, and work together to support each other.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's kind of like what this foster community is like, right? Like, I've made friends from it, and even other communities I've been in as a writer. So yeah, that resonates a lot. You mentioned like with Well, actually, let's go to David's question because it's related to the audience growth. He said, you mentioned you spend a lot of time on Twitter each week. Could you talk more about how you spend your Twitter time?
Mostly
You have to give
tweeting.
us every single little detail that could be totally embarrassing, by the way. Just kidding.
Mostly I spend like the mornings of the day tweeting about whatever the stupid thing is of the day that everyone's mad about. And then, you know, in the evenings I have a beer and I post almost exclusively about 90s indie rock and make stupid declarative statements about Weezer and Deftones being the best bands of all time.
Oh my God, I just tweeted yesterday, I said White Pony is the best hard rock album ever.
Oh yeah,
I was like, I would fight someone about that.
It's definitely my favorite.
So good.
No, I don't know. I definitely am like involved in media, Twitter, you know, whatever. I'm trying not to be though. Like I'm trying not to be constantly fucking pissed off all the time. So like, that's why I do kind of have started tweeting a lot more about music lately because it's fun and I don't want to like. I'm so sick of like talking about the same one asshole that everyone's mad about in that given day, you know, like a lot of the times, you know, everyone loves to like dunk on whoever the main character is, but a lot of times like, it's like that's covered, man. They got his ass. He's, you know, he's been well and thoroughly roasted. And so we can probably, you know, let that one go. I don't know. Twitter is fucking maddening, but it doesn't have to be, you know. And I'm trying to decrease the amount of annoying amount that annoys me in my life. I'm not doing a very good job.
That resonates a lot. So you mentioned earlier you were talking about deciding, you know, what to go as a free piece versus paid. But I'd be curious, is there like a piece that you've written in the past that was like you would say like one of the good ones that you think was kind of like criminally underread, or and then maybe the flip side, like something that you were just like put it out there and didn't think it'd do well, but it took off.
Yeah, there's examples of both. I can't, no one's not coming to mind now. But you like, I really don't ever have any idea like which, you know, I mean, sometimes, you know, like, okay, this one's obviously going to be a banger, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times sometimes I'll wake up and it's like, oh fuck, and you know, I got to do the newsletter and I might be hungover and I'll just do something and I'm like, oh my God, that's trash. I'm going to serve these people trash. And then I send it out and then everyone's like, oh my God, this one, it was so good. I'm like, geez, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, you know? And then sometimes I'll really put a lot of effort into one and do lots of reporting and try to make it like an actual more traditional piece and no one will give a shit. So there's really, I mean, it's like the same in any industry, you know, like the stuff they say about the film industry all the time, like nobody knows what they're talking about, and you know, and you know, except on a much more minuscule scale for me, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the music industry, it's very similar,
Right,
right?
you know, yeah.
It's like nobody really knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Even though they pretend they do. Well, we're coming up on time. If anyone else has like a last minute question, feel free to pop one in there. I guess I'd be curious to hear, you mentioned, I think it was 3 like main topics that you tend to write about, which is like healthcare.
Yeah,
like probably like
for-profit
brutality.
healthcare, militarized, you know, police abuses, and employers taking advantage of labor. I'd say.
So why those 3? I mean, I guess you've also interspersed some other stuff, but I would say it's related to healthcare because of COVID. But why those 3 as sort of like your pillars?
I don't know. I feel like those are like the 3 major things that's wrong with America, right? I mean, there's a pretty lengthy list, but you know, at the moment, those are the 3 that I'm sort of focused on, and I think maybe those are 3 that I think actually have a chance of fixing at some point. You know, there's a lot of things I'd like to see fixed, but it seems very easy to me that we could stop gouging people for going to the doctor. It seems to me we could get the police to stop killing everybody, and that we could treat our employees a little bit better. Those don't seem like very like far-fetched ideas, you know. And so maybe it's just like a way of like setting goals or aspirations that seem within reach, you know?
Yeah, totally. Well, it's funny because my last question is kind of related. But you know, your publication is called Welcome to Hell World, which evokes a certain feeling, and you definitely portray that in your writing. But with that in mind, is there any hope for us at all?
Oh, geez, man, that's yeah, I think there is, and that's I wouldn't be, you know, I wouldn't be here if there wasn't. You know, I think anytime anyone reviews my work or writes about it, they like say it seems really dour and cynical, but it's like get a through line of hopefulness for humanity in it, and I think that's true. And you know, if not, like, what's the point? Let's just fuck it, you know. So we're gonna try to do better. And like you know, since I've referenced him like 5 times already, Kurt Vonnegut, what do you say? God damn it, you got to be kind. So something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting how like through your writing, even though it can come across, I guess like some people say dour or angry or kind of in your face, it does feel like you have that sort of like, okay, you want to like enact some sort of change and change people's point of view, and that's, I guess, hopeful. But it's not the first word that would come to mind, I think, when people read your work.
No,
Right?
it's not the first
Yeah.
word, but it's in there. It's not like like when you look at the ingredients list, the first, you know, on a box of chips or something, the first line isn't hopefulness, but it's somewhere down there with like the food coloring and shit.
Yeah, it's like a very low percentage, but
Yeah, yeah.
nice.
Okay, I don't want to talk anymore.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we're done.
Yeah, good.
So
I don't mean that sounded rude, but I don't. You know, I get so sick of talking about myself. It seems it's not like I don't want to talk to you anymore. I don't want to talk about myself anymore. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, it's just,
I think you're also a little afraid you're gonna say Kurt Vonnegut's name again. I could be wrong.
could be worse, guys.
Cool. Well,
Okay,
thanks, Luke, and
thank
thanks everyone
everyone.
for showing up.
Thank you
And
for paying attention, everyone. I really appreciate it. And this was nice. And you know, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or whatever if you ever want to ask, I don't know, for advice or ask me what the best Deftones album is. Okay.
cool. Thanks, Luke.
Bye.
All right. Talk to you later.